This episode is sponsored by the Cornell S.E. Johnson College of Business. The Cornell Executive MBA Americas program is designed for goal achievers from any industry. The program works by advancing your career without interruption, by providing global perspectives and intimate classroom settings, and by challenging, informing, connecting, and propelling you. Achieve your goals with the Cornell Executive MBA Americas program on the weekend and close to home. Search Cornell EMBA Americas in my city today.
Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ellevate podcast. It's Megan here today. I know you might have noticed that this is being released on a Friday, not our usual schedule, and that the title's a little bit different. So for those of you who stay to the end of each episode, which you should definitely do, we have been celebrating history makers, different women who've been making history every single day for, I think we've been doing it about a year and a half now. It's my favorite thing that we do at the end of each week. We usually do about 6 of them each time. Well, turns out these are really popular, and we decided to start kind of a spin-off series still on the podcast. Don't worry, you'll still get them uploaded with your regular ones. Where I interview some of these amazing history makers. So that's what we're going to start doing. You'll start seeing these hitting on Fridays, including today's, which I am so excited about. I just finished my interview with her. In case you can't tell by the title, today I am talking to Amna Nawaz, who is one of the anchors of PBS NewsHour, which you might have heard me talk about in the past on the podcast, talking about how it's my favorite news organization. I watch it all the time. It's just fabulous. I cannot emphasize enough how much, if you want just fair, balanced news that is only an hour a day, 30 minutes on the weekends, so you don't feel overwhelmed by everything, like the endless scroll of the 24-hour news cycle. Such a good place to turn to. It's super accessible too. They upload every episode via podcast form, so you can look it up wherever you're seeing your podcasts here. You can see all of the episodes on YouTube, obviously on PBS. It's fabulous. It's an hour of news a day. It's exactly what you need to hear. Amna and I get into a lot over the course of our interview, but one of the things that she talks about is how many different women are running behind the scenes of PBS NewsHour and just PBS in general, which is amazing. We talk about journalism. We talk about her status as a history maker. If you weren't there for the particular episode in which we call her out as a history maker, it was toward the beginning of this year, because toward the beginning of this year, she became the first Muslim, first Pakistani American, and first generation American to anchor PBS NewsHour. It's just such a great conversation, guys. You're really going to enjoy it, and enjoy the rest of the history makers to come. Welcome to Amna Nawaz from PBS NewsHour.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Hi, it's so amazing to have you on. So listeners of the podcast will have heard when we do our History Makers segments at the end of each podcast, highlighting people who've made history. You are the first Muslim, the first Pakistani American, and first generation American to anchor PBS NewsHour.
That is all true. I can confirm. Yes.
Yes. So huge congratulations. Thank you so much for being on our History Makers podcast. I want to start out by asking you just to talk about your journey into journalism, because I know it wasn't your original life plan, and how you kind of figured out that was what you wanted to do.
It was not my original life plan, but I think it's an important lesson that original life plans rarely work out the way we think they will. I'm the first generation American daughter of parents from Pakistan. We were raised to, work hard, study hard, kind of live up to your full potential, make the most of all the opportunities you've been given here. I thought I was heading to law school. That was the path for me, not because I loved law or really was excited about it, but I was an overachieving, high-performing student athlete, and I thought, well, this makes sense. Everyone kept telling me this is what you should do. But coming out of school in 2001, I wasn't ready to go straight to law school. And I thought, well, just put my LSAT scores on hold for a year. I want to get some real world experience. And I did a 1-year fellowship in journalism with ABC News in Washington. As I said, that was in 2001. We all know in September of 2001, our world changed. And I happened to be in one of the best newsrooms of the entire industry at that time and witnessing what happens when the world shifts around you. Terrible things happen. No one knows which way is up, and journalists have to figure out how to make sense of it all. And I say today, I'm a journalist today because of 9/11, because of that day. I saw the best of us. I saw what's possible. I saw how necessary this work is. And I just couldn't see myself doing anything else after that. So I never went to law school, and I'm a journalist still today.
That's incredible. And it's amazing to me that, you say you saw the best of us on 9/11. But I think we all know that in the ensuing months and years after 9/11, there was certainly a completely unwarranted backlash against the Muslim community. How did you navigate that as someone who was going through journalism, the way of journalism of making sure that you were showing, the truth?
Yeah. Yeah, it was really tough to be part of the community that was suddenly under like a white hot spotlight. And to be honest, I was raised Muslim in what I would call a fairly liberal, progressive Muslim home. Um, but it was never the biggest part of my identity. And suddenly it was the part of my identity that everybody seemed to care the most about. And I was the only Muslim in the newsroom. We were a small team there on the Nightline team that I was on. And I recall getting a lot of questions, really well-intentioned questions from my colleagues about my faith and about what we're taught and what does this word mean and why would they say this. And I found myself in the position as a 21-year-old young adult who was really just finding out her way in the world. I found myself in the position of having to suddenly be like a religious expert in a way that I had never had to be before in my life. And I realized how unfair that was, right? I think a lot of Muslim Americans felt that at the time, that suddenly all of us were expected to answer for the actions of a few who claimed this religion. And I saw how necessary it was for someone like me to be in some of those conversations, to be able to say, actually, that's not at all what we believe. That's not at all what anyone I know believes. That's not at all what anyone I know was taught. Like, we have to frame this a little differently than it's being framed. And, I was a very junior member of the team. I was really responsible for like running scripts and fact checking things and pulling research. But I was lucky to be on a team where everyone's voice had value and everyone's voice was respected. So I learned really early to speak up. And I learned really early the value of having diverse and varied voices at the table, especially in a newsroom at a time like that.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that about feeling like you were meant to be the expert on a religion, which is enormously an unfair, undue burden. I know we have at Ellevate, we have our community circles where, people of a similar community come together and talk. And I was talking to somebody who was running one of our Black women community circle, which I'm a white woman. And she was expressing, sometimes it's so frustrating to feel like you have to be Black Wikipedia. And she said, I'm sure there's something out there. And I said, oh, yes. As a bisexual woman, she said, oh, I bet. Yeah, I bet they expect you to be LGBTQ Wikipedia, huh?
Right. I think it's true. I think it's true for a lot of, historically marginalized communities, what would have been previously called minority communities. But, as I like to say, all these groups and women put together make up the majority of the country. So it's not really accurate to call us minorities. I
Amen.
think, I learned a lot of important lessons, and it was at, the stakes couldn't have been higher in some ways. You have to remember there were a lot of Muslim families, and also I should say Sikh families. People who practice Sikhism in America became targets largely due to the ignorance of when it comes to the Muslim faith of many Americans. And there were people shot, there were people beaten, there were people spit on in grocery stores. So many of our friends and family hung American flags outside their homes, trying to prove how American we were. I used to have a prayer ring that I wore from my grandmother on my pinky, and And I remember getting a lot of strange looks on the subway, and I finally turned it around so the script part, the Arabic script part, faced inside, so people would stop staring as much. But there was just this sense of you didn't know what was going to happen. And I learned very early, as I said, I was 21 years old. This is the only country I've ever called home. And all of a sudden, I felt like this is not a safe place for me. This is no longer my home, or at least a lot of people think I shouldn't be here.
Yeah, and I can't how did you navigate that? Was there anything you figured out, or was it
Yeah,
just a day-to-day
I just,
process?
this has become my coping mechanism over the years. I just threw myself into my work. My parents have always taught me that I'm not responsible for the ignorance of others, right? And that anyone's issue or confusion over who I am and whether I belong here or not is not my burden to sort out. It's their issue to work through. But at the same time, I saw how widespread that issue was, and I saw how many communities were affected, and I saw just how gapingly wide some of those chasms of misinformation were. And I felt like I'm in a position to do something about it, right? As a member of the news media, as a journalist, like I get to fill and help to fill all of those voids of information with facts and things that I know to be true. And that is incredibly empowering in a moment like that, because especially on the day when we didn't know what attack would be next, and we didn't know what would happen in the weeks that followed after, when we declared war and suddenly we have no idea what the world is going to look like, there was a lot of information to be filled in. And I think and for me at that time, sort of the best path forward was just throw myself into my work. This is mission, this is work that needs to be done, and I'm someone who can do it well.
Oh, that's yes. Thank you so much. And listeners have heard me talk about how much I love PBS NewsHour on the podcast before. And so can confirm that, I see that every day I see, women all over PBS NewsHour, people of color all over PBS NewsHour. And I love that, you're all bringing that same sense of mission to your work every
Thank you
day.
for that. I hope I'm saying thank you on behalf of an entire team of people, most of whom you never even get to see or hear from, but that's who it takes to get that show across the finish line every day, and everything we do online. It is mission driven work. I mean, it's something special about our team here too, especially in public media, where you come here because you believe in the power of journalism, and you believe that it's a necessary part of a functioning democracy. That is what draws people to this work on this team. So thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting.
Yes, yes. Viewers like us, right?
Exactly.
uh, so speaking of PBS, I want to fast forward a little bit. So you've been working at PBS for a while now, doing all kinds of correspondent work. Of course, Judy Woodruff has been the anchor for ever, legend of journalism that she is. And then it comes to pass that she's decided to step away, though, of course, she's still contributing to the NewsHour. I know she had that amazing piece, Crossroads, last night, which will date what day we're recording this. Yes. But so you get the news. I'm sure there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that we don't know about, but you get the news that you and Jeff Bennett will be taking forward the anchor position, co-anchor positions. How did you feel? What was that process like for you?
Well, there's obviously been conversations going on for a while. Judy, as you mentioned, had been the solo anchor since 2016, when we lost another icon of this industry, Gwen Ifill, who'd been her co-anchor for the years prior. And this is, NewsHour is a place that kind of stands alone in journalism today. There's really nothing else like it. There's only ever been 4 people who've sat in the anchor chair at this institution that's been around, by the way, since before I was even born. Like that when we say institution, that's what we're talking about. So when the opportunity came up for me and for Jeff Bennett, as you mentioned, my co-anchor and my dear friend here, to step into those co-anchor roles, it's like a dream come true. I mean, this is the job that I never could have imagined myself even having back when I started my career 20 years ago. It wouldn't have seemed possible to me back then. And to be able to step into this role at this particular moment in American history, also, I should say, when we're in many ways, it feels like a full circle moment. I stepped into this role as a journalist at a time of a lot of chaos and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions being asked about who are we as a country and what are our most important values and what do we stand for and what do we fight for and who gets to belong here. And I feel like we're having a lot of those same conversations and asking a lot of those same questions now. So in many ways, I feel perfectly prepared to step into this role. I have been here before. I have seen many of these issues come up before. And I've spent the last 20 years traveling the world, traveling the country, reporting on thousands of stories on every topic under the sun. It's what we do best here at NewsHour. We cover all the stories that people need to know. So, gosh, it's really exciting. It's a really exciting role to be stepping into right now.
That is so fabulous. And I'm glad you mentioned Gwen Ifill. You want to talk about two legends of journalism.
Yes. Yes. And the
Yes.
first female anchor team, by the way, on a national news broadcast in American history. So can we just say that?
Oh, you want to talk about history makers,
Right?
Like, oh, yes. And I was actually going to ask, what is it like, continuing that tradition of strong women anchors of, this huge station that reaches so many people across America.
So here's something not many people know. So obviously we stepped into a role that was previously held by a woman, by Judy Woodruff, right? Her previous co-anchor was also a woman, Gwen Ifill. Our executive producer, Sarah Just, is a woman. The head of our station, WETA, is Sharon Rockefeller, also a woman. The head of the network, PBS, is also a woman, Paula Kerger. And we have a number of other senior women across all of those levels as well. It's the first place I've ever worked in my career where that is true. And we are also right now the most trusted and credible news brand in the country. I like to think the two things are linked. Maybe not, but I like to think so.
I like to think so too. No, definitely. And I didn't even know that, but I'd heard some of them because you go over the credits at the beginning of each episode. So I hear some of those names, but it doesn't really hit in that you're like, oh yeah, that's a woman's name. That's a woman's name. That's a woman's name, I was just sitting here kind of applauding as you were naming all those names.
Yeah, which is also, goes to show just how far we've come in this industry, that stands alone as an example, that it's not still the norm. It's still a rarity, but it's working really well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so part of the reason you're here, other than, me being a fangirl, is that you are quite a history maker in and of yourself. What advice do you have for others, journalists or young Muslim women or anyone looking to follow in your footsteps and follow their dreams in journalism?
So first of all, I have to say I'm so grateful and honored and humbled. I think I kind of disagree with the premise of this conversation a little bit. I don't feel like I'm making history in any way. I feel like I'm just following in the footsteps of so many people who have come before me and doing my best to hold the door open for those coming behind me. I feel like all of us are just on this continuum. You carry the baton as long as you can for as far as you can, and then you hand it off. So I'm just beyond grateful for every opportunity that comes my way. Really, truly, more than anything, I wake up every day and I go to bed every day with that one sentiment, which is a moment of gratitude. Because I recognize the power and the privilege that comes with this platform, and I know I didn't get here alone. So in terms of advice, man, I would just say that as one thing, which is be grateful, like remember how you got where you are, and remember that people will come after you, that you're accountable to them as well. And also something I wish more folks had told me when I was coming up, and I think we're in a better place in terms of having this conversation more widely these days, but kind of this idea of bringing your whole self to the work that you do. I think there were, when I was starting out, a lot of avenues, not just in journalism, but a lot of avenues in professional lanes that felt closed off to many people just because there hadn't been someone who necessarily looked like you walking that path ahead of you. And so people automatically dismiss it and think, well, that's not meant for me. And I'm so glad I didn't do that. I'm so glad that I stuck with this because this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. I look around me now and I see people who are exactly where they're supposed to be, even if there wasn't someone like them moving on that path ahead of them. So I tell people to kind of lean into who they are, to not try to fit in with everyone else around them, to not dim their light or dull their edges or make themselves smaller in any way to try to fit into the institutions they're trying to enter, because where you think you should be is exactly where you should be. And I think that's how we bring about some of the change that I know a lot of us are working towards, which is to make institutions of power in this country more representative of the communities that they're meant to be serving.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you actually said that you kind of disagree with the history maker, because I've kind of heard that sentiment a couple times from the history makers we're interviewing.
Oh, really?
Uh,
That's a
yeah,
commonality.
yeah,
That's
where
good
they're
to
just
know.
like, I feel like this was just what I needed to do. And
Right.
I did what I needed to do. It wasn't about making history.
No, I mean, no one sets out to, well, maybe some people do. I certainly didn't, to be the first of anything, right? You set out to be the best. You want to do your work and do your job to the best of your ability. And I'm naturally competitive anyway. Like, I was an athlete growing up. And so when I put myself in front of something, I say, okay, how can I do this? How can I do this the best of my ability? How can I learn? How can I grow? How can I keep challenging myself? I'm still that way. I will still to this day. I have a really close circle of friends who, not necessarily folks I work with here, but who know the industry. I still have friends I will reach out to from time to time who go over tape with me, who will review interviews with me and say, oh, you could have done this better, or like, oh, work on this a little bit more. I just think you're never done learning. You're never done getting better.
Yes, I just agree with that so much. I actually forgot my next point.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I do. I wanted to ask a little bit more about being a journalist right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard not to ask. There's certainly, and I'm not going to name names, but there's certain, politicians who very much go after the media.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine being a journalist in this time of competing news sources for everyone's attention.
Yeah.
Internet algorithms telling people every single opposite thing. How do you navigate all of that and try to just bring the honest truth, or the most honest truth and facts to people that you can?
Yeah, it's a really messy and noisy information landscape that we're working in. I mean, we are a world away from, back in the day when there were just three networks and you turned to one of them at the end of the day and that was where you got your news. And maybe there was one or two newspapers and that was it. I mean, people are drinking from an information fire hose every single day. And I think in many ways that just demands that we as journalists step up our game. Like, we have to meet the moment. We have to make sure that the good stuff continues to rise to the top and cut through the noise, as I believe it does. But, I think a lot about this quote I read once from Zora Neale Hurston about, and I will butcher it here, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something about, there are years in which questions are asked, and there are years that provide answers. And I feel like we are right now in those years that a lot of questions are being asked. And our job as journalists is to continue every day to do fact driven, mission driven work, to fill those voids of information, to push back on the forces of disinformation and the forces that seek to undermine our work, and to keep filling in all the facts as we go. Because I'm a firm believer in the idea that love and truth will win the day. And I just think you can't give up. You just have to keep going, and we will get to those years that provide answers. But right now is a really good time to be asking questions. And that's why I say it's a really good time to be a journalist.
I love that, because I think there's so many people being warned away from journalism right now. My best friend is a journalist, and she was told, in grad school, just straight up, oh, there will be people who want to attack you. And she said, oh, okay. So I love that, your point is that's what makes it. I mean, well, not the lack of safety, but that people need journalists more is what makes it a better time to be a journalist.
Yeah, I think so. And I also think, look, on the safety front, I would never say that anyone should put themselves in harm's way to do their work. I hope folks who are working with the news organizations are taking every precaution they need to. But I also cut my teeth on this work overseas. I was a foreign journalist for years and years. And I think my idea of danger, like my spectrum of what danger means on this job, is maybe different than a lot of folks. Like, there were days I used to have to put on a flak jacket and a helmet every day to go to work. There were days I had to barricade myself into my home just to avoid getting kidnapped or the threat of kidnapping at night, and go through kidnapping training. And so, there are all kinds of dangers that, by the way, a whole fleet of journalists work under those conditions every day around the world. Here in America, it is still a relatively safe profession. And if the worst of what we have to face is a bunch of anonymous trolls coming after you online, which absolutely happens, and people calling you horrible names and issuing empty threats, I'm good. I can take that. We will continue to move forward.
Oh, that is amazing to hear. Yeah, and you're right. This is they've got nothing on what you've done.
No, I hope, I like to say that the work speaks for itself, right?
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, and I can say, if I haven't made it clear, I'm very happy. But in general, just thank you to journalists for everything they do to try to keep getting the right news out to the right people, and all the work they do. So there is one question that I always want to end the history makers with. It actually ties back beautifully with what you were saying earlier of building on others who have come before you, which is we always want to even if you're the first, you want to make sure you're not the last, and we all stand on each other's shoulders, one by one. So what history maker in the past inspired you the most?
I even knew this question was coming, and I still have a hard time coming up with an answer. I think it's just because, gosh, there's so many people. It took so many people for someone like me to be where I am today. And I've had the benefit of being able to work alongside some of them, like certainly being able to work under Judy Woodruff when she was anchoring here as a correspondent. I learned a ton. She's an incredible mentor and friend and guide. When I was at NBC and ABC, I had the benefit of learning from other icons, Cokie Roberts and Andrea Mitchell and Martha Raddatz and Ann Curry. And I recently actually had the chance to meet Connie Chung in person for the first time, and I actually got a little teary just being able to say thank you to her in person. I'd never been able to do that before, and I can't imagine what she had to go through coming up when she did in the body that she did. But more than anyone, this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. More than anyone, I've been thinking a lot about the women who rewrote the stories that history was writing for them and made it possible for me to be here today. And that's my mom and my grandmother on my mom's side, because my grandmother was a woman of extraordinary courage and strength and resilience. And she lost a child, and she raised 4 kids through war and partition and migration, and kept that family together and raised my mom, and then blessed my mom's journey with a man she didn't know that well all the way around the planet. And then my mom, as a young 20-something-year-old, built an entirely new life and a new home for my sisters and I in a country that she'd never set foot in before in her life. And I think a lot about the hope and the resilience that got my grandmother through those years, that she passed on to my mom, that my mom used to build the life for my sisters and I, and that I use today in the work that I do. You have to be resilient to do this work, and you have to do it with hope, because you have to believe that it's making some kind of a difference. So more than anything, I think I'm walking on a path that my grandmother and my mom walked long before me.
That is an absolutely beautiful sentiment, and I'm so glad. That's perfect. I don't have anything better that we can end on. So, Amna, I want to thank you so much for being on the Ellevate podcast, the History Makers specials, but just in general, I think our audience is just going to take so much away from this.
I hope so. I really hope folks find this interesting, and I can't wait to listen to the rest of your conversations. I'm really grateful for your interest. Thank you so much. And for your support of the NewsHour. On behalf of the whole team, thank you.
Thank you.
Ellevate Network drives real results for ambitious women trying to break through the glass ceiling and achieve success in their careers. We offer a platform full of resources and opportunities for growth, all designed to help you unlock your potential. With Ellevate support, you can take the first step toward achieving your professional goals. With a supportive community and tangible resources at your fingertips, you're only one step away from reaching your fullest potential. Join us today and take advantage of our 30-day free trial to start building the career of your dreams. Thanks so much for listening to the Ellevate podcast. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, give us 5 stars, and share your review. You can learn all about Ellevate membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. Thanks so much, and join us next week.